This session will be focused on the discussion of essay number 1, primarily reflections about the work that you have done. I have some suggestions for in the form of general comments. I have already given you individual comments, but the general comments would complement the individual comments for the revision process. In addition to that, there would be a slide presentation on the revision process itself. And the multi-layered process of the revision process when it comes to the content, the organization, and the language element. We'll talk about these issues. In addition, you will have the opportunity to explore your own critical reading practices. I would call it practices rather than skills, even though you are more familiar with that term. And I do have a problem with using the term skill in this context. And learning different ways of improving, expanding, enriching, enhancing your reading repertoire, your reading practices. So for that, I also created a question on Nearpod about your reading strategies. What are these strategies that you ordinarily use? Not that you should use, but you use. We have reading practices in the same way that we have writing practices. And ordinarily, we confuse what we should do with what we actually do. So we will also look into that aspect, because reading and writing go hand in hand, and you probably came to grips with the ways in which you were trying to integrate the sources into your own argument in writing the first essay. So with that introduction, I don't know if I mentioned the midterm as well. Perhaps I did before the recording. I will also discuss the midterm and the procedure for taking it. It is a multiple choice mode of testing. It shouldn't take too long. I don't think it is particularly difficult either. So with that introduction, let me form the breakout rooms. The purpose of the breakout rooms at this point is to discuss basically not only your reflections, the challenges that you had in writing the first draft of the paper, but also to discuss your critical reading strategies. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I did take a glimpse of some of the breakout rooms and observed and listened to a few comments, mostly about the reflections that you had on the first, basically, essay that you wrote. Max, can you bring up any notes that they jotted down in the Nearpod?
So very common theme on the, is this about the critical reading or about the essays?
The reflections on the essay first.
Okay. So very common thing that people cited having difficulty with was citations. I had challenges with writing my essay in APA format since I'd never used it before.
Mm-hmm.
I had challenges with writing in APA format. Right. I had a challenge with citations. I had trouble citing in APA format because I have only to write essays in MLA format. So it seems citations were a very common theme, yes. A very common point of difficulty.
Yeah, that is what I also found myself commenting on repeatedly throughout my reading.
Many other people talked about the thesis. I also had a challenge writing a clearer thesis. I had a challenge with formatting my thesis to make it as clear as possible. I had challenges with writing a clear thesis. So that's 3 of them. Said that the thesis was a challenging point to them. Also, the presentation of evidence to support said thesis. I had a challenge with expanding my thoughts further to fit my thesis. A challenge I had with writing this essay was backing my information with more evidence rather than just my opinions and ideas. I had to get out of my debate mindset and remember what an essay requires to effectively get my point across. Mm-hmm. So a couple of people talked about having to use ample evidence to support their essay.
Right.
So those seem to be the 3 biggest issues. Citations, number 1. Number 2, writing a clear thesis. And number 3, supporting the thesis with evidence. And having to find ample evidence to use.
So the question is, if they were able to solve those problems, I think that is really the crucial question to ask.
Yeah, definitely. If your thesis is clear, then the entire point of your essay becomes much clearer. So that can improve your score if you're rewriting your essay. Also, making sure that you have a lot of evidence to back up your points. Don't just give your opinion. You need to have, you need to give examples, you need to have evidence, and you need to show how the evidence ties back to your thesis. That's a very important part. If you don't have commentary, if you just lay out a bunch of evidence, but you don't explain how the evidence ties back to your thesis, then it's not clear how your evidence supports your thesis. So that's something that I think that's something that people need to take a look at as well and make sure that they're doing.
Yes, so let me pull up, basically, I have some general comments about the essays that I read. So let me share my screen with you. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
So the purpose of the general comments is really to give you my overall sense of the totality of the essays that I read, and any reading is very basically subjective. Keep that in mind. You could always challenge my interpretation of what I have read. So it is important to basically respond to the prompt. And generally, I was pleased with the quality of the work that you had done. I think some of you have been able to develop more sophisticated and perceptive treatment of the topic. The arguments generally, in some cases, were organized and specific with convincing evidence. Most paragraphs were coherent and effectively integrated into the thesis. The details were relevant and significant, and each reason was thoroughly developed and supported with credible and well-integrated sources. Obviously, there were problems with different areas of what you had done in terms of the content, the organization, and the structure. But the essays that had done pretty well, and I did ask for copies from 2 or 3 students, I would encourage them to volunteer to read their essay to class. Those basically had tackled those problems. Their essays were well structured with transitions and logical developments. They had very few stylistic basically errors. And by stylistic errors, I mean in terms of language, word choice, word form, punctuation mechanics, sentence variety, grammatical accuracy, so to speak. And not only grammatical accuracy, but also writing in the genre, writing academically, so to speak. Obviously, there are areas of improvement, even if you do a wonderful job. Areas of improvement, as you had identified, some of those range from broad, weak, sketchy thesis, inadequate development, lack of sufficient details, trivial and obvious, basically, reasons, problems in organization. There were gaps, lapses, or leaps, ineffective organization in terms of the introduction, body, and conclusion, inaccurate and insufficient APA citation, and you had mentioned that, as Max did in your commentaries. There were also stylistic, grammatical, mechanical, and punctuation problems, such as agreement of subject and verb, run-on sentences, fragments, tense shift, use of articles, wrong forms, and word forms. So areas of improvement really would boil down to this fundamental question. Did you really think about the following, implicitly or explicitly, consciously or unconsciously? And when we write, we have to actually be more conscious. What is our purpose? Who is our audience, and what genre are we writing in? So this is really a well-known model, a triangle of a text in which you have the writer, you have the audience, and you have the purpose. And definitely that would determine the direction. In terms of argumentation, a method that has been used since ancient Greek times is really a balance, creating credibility, authority, authenticity, validity. And for this, particularly the topics that we deal with should really bring ethos, logos, and pathos together. Pathos as emotions and imagination, ethos as credibility and trust, and definitely use credible sources in order to build and establish your own authority, your own credibility, so that readers basically trust you. And logos would be the sources that you have been using in terms of consistency and logical progression of your ideas, the concrete examples, if you will. So for our purpose, logos would be primarily the sources that you are using. And more importantly than anything else, I would say, and I wrote this to some of you, to question our own assumptions, hidden assumptions, open, if you will, biases, that we have, that we may not acknowledge, and we may think they are part of the common sense. Last time we talked about the prescriptive and descriptive attitude. It's not very easy, to be in matters related to issues of language where you have pathos, vehement, basically feelings and sentiments involved, to be balanced. But anyway, for any argument to be persuasive, to take a rhetorical approach, this is just one approach when it comes to argument structure, is to use these elements in balance and coordination. Now, it is important that any kind of argument follows a theoretical framework of some sort. Your source or sources would constitute that theoretical framework. For instance, do you follow structuralism, behaviorism, cognitivism, functionalism, interactionism, mentalism? Do you really look at the relation between culture and language, implicitly or explicitly? What perspective really have you taken? If you have taken a linguistic perspective, this deals with language and linguistics. So what is the approach that you are taking? Are you following a generative, basically, approach? I know most of you are new to this field, but you have read, for instance, about Chomsky, you have read about linguistic anthropology, sociolinguistics, just a little bit of everything. Applied linguistics, neurolinguistics, that looks at the relation between the mind and language, computational linguistics, so on and so forth. So while I know it is basically too much of an expectation to have, it is important to be cautious about, the approach that you are taking, so that your general argument, in a way, not only, for instance, if you take a generative approach, meaning that we are born into language. Language is something, as Chomsky says, it's something that happens to you. It is not something that you learn. It is hardwired into our brains. Obviously, interactionists would have a different approach, but within interactionism, you have those who believe that, yes, Chomsky is right, but definitely interaction plays a very significant role in the acquisition of language. So being aware of these, broadly speaking, sociolinguists, for instance, as you have come to notice, would look at the relation between language and society. That the social group that you belong to, for instance, class, gender, status, all these would be reflected in the ways in which you are seen in a society, and it is reflected in the way they see or judge basically your language. Some of you, for instance, in responding to the study questions, had said that you had negative attitude towards certain varieties of, for instance, English or some other languages. Definitely this shows the pervasive power of language attitudes and stereotypes that we have internalized even without knowing. So the purpose of this course is that we become conscious of our own assumptions. And we do have all these assumptions, which may take us to be unquestionable, really, truths. But it is important to have an open mind and to be flexible. And in the process of researching and writing and reading these essays, you should be willing and if not eager to change basically your mind. So going back to the areas of improvements, have you used linguistic concepts and frames clearly and competently? Have you framed your arguments confidently, persuasively through these really thorny controversies, or you felt, you remained trapped and embroiled in your own arguments? We had some essays, the argument was not really going anywhere. So you could ask some questions when it comes to the revision process. What are the grounds for your argument? What properties separate us from other animals? Quite a few of you had written about this particular topic. What bias and fallacies can you find in the logic? What are the divergent ideas and where do they occur? How do you account for counterpoints or counter-arguments? How do you tell the difference between, myths and facts? And in what ways linguists and non-linguists experience friction of ideas? So I do have some suggestions here for those who need to improve the quality of their work. And I think there is always room for improvement, but at a certain point, we have to part with what we have written. So this is in the area of style. Read each sentence carefully, make sure each sentence is complete, identify and list your errors. How are your sentences? Too simple without variations. Evaluate your word choice, use a more formal language and not slang and informal language. I have nothing against using slang, particularly in this course. It gives your writing freshness and vitality, as long as you consciously use it and readers know that you are not unconsciously basically using slang where you should use semi-formal or formal English. There are some suggestions about how to, for instance, look at the organization of your essay in terms of revising to make your introduction more effective, more interesting. That would also include catchy, title, a title that says something about your essay, about your thesis, about your claim. So I would say any kind of revision really involves three: content, organization, and language. When you go back to revise, read your essay. What is my thesis? Is it clear? Is it just an assertion, or it is something that is arguable? This is about argumentation. It has to be arguable. Then you have to provide multiple reasons, several reasons. What are the reasons? So you answer those questions, you're done with the content revision. You could improve upon your thesis. If it is not satisfactory, you could, for instance, take out some reasons, add new ones, or expand the reasons that you have. That will take care of the content. You don't worry about the structure. It is the second level of reading where you would focus on the structure of the essay, your introduction, the development, the so-called body paragraphs. Do I have a topic sentence in each paragraph that would re-encapsulate my thesis statement? Do I use transitions? Do I use connectives? Are the transitions meaningful? Do they help readers basically walk and go through my text from word to word, from sentence to sentence, from paragraph to paragraph? Those are cohesive devices that we need to basically use to mark the integrity and the flow of our text. And eventually, have I created, globally looking at the essay, a coherent text that everything hangs together? Once you're done with the organization, those are the main questions, then you focus on language. I'm sure that you have taken writing classes before. You have been told what kind of typical errors recur in your writing. First, you look for those errors. And then this has to be broken down into, for instance, word forms, word choice, sentence types, sentence structures, anything that you may be conscious about your style of writing, punctuation, mechanics, diction, you name it. All these would definitely help the process of the third level of revision, which is language. Now, if you look at the three levels at the same time, it would be too overwhelming. It would be too daunting a task. It is unmanageable. So that's why I'm saying it is important that you do 3 levels of revision every time you write an essay, not only for this class, for any class, any work that you would do. You want to familiarize yourself with the prompt. You want to explore possibilities for revision, and you want to meet your newly set objectives for revision. So here I've included the 3 levels of revision and the process of revising your essay. The summary may be helpful, defining the problems that you had. That would be the first step. Rework problematic areas, revise your work, resubmit for a better grade. That's what I meant by the third level. So this is PDF, I cannot even correct it. So a better grade. I think most of you, received passing grade. And here someone had suggested, I agree, I have the link to OWL, Purdue University, which provides you with a rich, actually, resource, or rather rich resources when it comes to APA or MLA citations and different aspects of writing, including citations. Let me see if I can bring up general comments that I uploaded, but I was not able to find it. Does anyone have any questions?
So is the final draft due on before the Sunday or on Sunday?
I will give every revision about a week. You really have to distance yourself from what you have written too. So if it is done in a hasty manner, it may not be very helpful. Definitely peer review would be beneficial, especially with the second essay. We're going to embark on that more actively. You could have between a week to 10 days to resubmit. I hope that is enough time, because I want you to be able to distance yourself. We have a tendency to fall in love with what we write, but if you distance yourself from it and you go back, you would say, oh my God, how come I didn't see that? Okay, this is what I wanted to show you. Do you see my, no. Do you see my screen? The new screen, format and citations?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we had a problem, and the problem was not particularly yours. How to cite basically the sources in this reader, especially the packet. Obviously, it is easier to cite this book, right? Do you agree?
Yeah.
It is easier because, you know, you do
Professor, we can't see the actual site.
right. This is an edited book. Definitely you have to, when you look it up, you have to look up how do you cite an edited book in APA. And that is what the Purdue University link here basically does. But I was thinking, okay, how are you going to, for instance, some of you had used Savage Rambal, okay, 1992, or I'm not sure, maybe 1980s, language training of apes, right? So I would say that most of you had just mentioned Finney 2019 or 2000 something, or ND, meaning the date is unknown. But I think, you know, this would be the approach to take. Savage Rambal, ES, last name, first name, the date of the publication, 1992. Language Training of Apes, that is the title, reprinted in The Nature of Language. And that's basically this book, right? Do you see it?
Yeah.
Reprinted in The Nature of Language, Ling 100. This is the course, which is a course reader. And I'm using the latest version, which is 2020.
Professor, we can't see what you're doing.
Oh, you can't. When I asked, somebody said that they do see it. So let me share my screen again. Okay. Okay, do you see it now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I thought basically you were looking at the same page. So again, some of you, for instance, and once you figure one source out, you could apply it to other sources. Savage Rambal, last name, right? And then you have the initials, first names, the date of the publication. In MLA, some of you are familiar with MLA. In MLA, the date goes to the end, but in APA, it's right after the name. Again, last name, first name. And obviously in the works cited, it has to be alphabetical. The title, Language Training of Apes, reprinted. This is what has happened in The Nature of Language. This is basically the book, the second basically book, rather than book, I would say this is the reader. So Ling 100 course reader, my version is 2020, and I found it on these pages 43 to 48. California State University, but California State University actually has not published this. It is McGraw-Hill. So I wasn't really sure. The reason basically it's a course reader. California State University should be probably put here, and then McGraw-Hill is the publisher. Do you see my logic in doing this?
Yes.
Now it is easy to find this. At least, you know, people can identify the source. We are not, in a way, we are identifying the original source and the ways in which it has been used in a course reader. Now, this is not an edited, it is not an, maybe it is an anthology, so the citation practices would vary. When it comes to in-text citation, this is how I would do it. As Savage Rambal described, the scientist's initial discovery of communication of primates as cited in Finney 2020. Do you see that? Now, what we are saying, you basically saw this in this packet. So maybe this is how we could address that problem. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes.
So I do have some links, and again, Purdue University, if you just do a search, and our own library has a wealth of information actually about APA, MLA. We have tutoring, we have writing, basically center at the university that you could take advantage of at different levels of your writing. And it is important that you go to them with specific really questions. Those workshops would be definitely very helpful. Any questions?
No.
So how much time do we have? I'm losing track of time as usual.
We have 13 minutes.
15 minutes?
13.
30 minutes?
13.
13 minutes only?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we should go over the critical reading next time. Perhaps it is a good idea to talk about the midterm. I'm sure you're curious about the midterm, what the content of the midterm is. So the content of the midterm is based on the content of what we have read and what we have discussed. And definitely you are doing a great deal of work when it comes to the study guide questions and your comments. So I have made it easier for you. It is a multiple choice formatted midterm. There will be around 75 questions, true and false, multiple choice. And definitely they would cover what we have covered so far. So I will make it available on Saturday. I'll make it available on Sunday. I'm not sure about the time constraint yet, how much time you would have for that, but I will make sure that you would have enough time. Would you say that 2 hours would be sufficient?
Yeah.
Yes.
So you would have about 2 hours, but it is important that you do it during that period of time. I will send out an email when basically the test would be available, so that basically you, I'm sure that most of you would successfully do it. It's not really a complicated test. So do you have any questions?
The study guide, is it under the, is it in like content under there for the whole midterm?
I don't know if we do, but I would say, anything related to, the study guide questions and your own responses to the questions, to the study guides. Based on that, I think you should be able to do well. So the question is, what are the areas that you need to review? Anything that we have covered by, let's say, midterm would definitely qualify. And there are quite a few items. For instance, it is important to know the main concepts, what language is, the underlying principles that make human language different, and quite a few of you have already written about this, different from animal communication. So the features of language, for instance, being able to identify examples, to be able to define certain terms, such as, for instance, recursivity. What is it? When you have 4 or 5 choices, you have to be able to identify which one means recursivity in language, for instance. With the true and false questions, definitely you have to read the questions very carefully. It is much easier to pick someone or something, as being true or false. Apart from definitions, there would be some examples. For instance, if a language, for instance, let me use an example from Kurdish that I know, Pencerekeshkan, meaning she broke the window, she or he. We couldn't tell the gender. Panjera would be window, and shkand is broke, and shkand, he or she. So I would say if you have a language like this, what is the verb, the word order? Is it subject, verb, object, or is it verb, subject, object, or is it subject, object, verb? The examples would be given from English, so you don't have to worry about other languages. But definitely you should be able, for instance, in English, if we say she broke the window, what is the order? Could someone tell me, is it VOS, SVO, or SOV? Subject, verb, object, subject, object, verb, verb, subject, object. Which order English follows? Are you with me?
Is it subject, verb, object?
In English, obviously, yeah, that is the order. But in the first example that I gave you, it was subject, object, and then basically the verb. So anyway, examples that basically type would be given to you. So as long as you have kept up with the readings, the language myth, basically chapters, and the assigned text and the nature of language, you should be fine. For instance, it is important to know what the difference, again, between Creole and Pidgin, for instance, languages are. How pigeons come about. Anyone knows what a pigeon is?
A bird?
Not that kind of pigeon. It's a linguistic term. Pigeon. Yeah, I know what you mean by a bird, but this is pigeon. P-I-G-I-N. References have been made to pigeon. It's a language basically which comes about as a result of throwing people who speak different languages, and they developed a common language, which is a simple, basically basic language they develop in the process when, you know, two groups or more groups who speak different languages are thrown together. This is something that happened during the slave basically ships when they were bringing slaves to the new continent. So its vocabulary and grammar are limited, and it comes from different sources. So that is pigeon, not, don't say it is a bird. And then there is the question of Creole. Does anyone know what Creole is? Because it is related to pigeon. Anyone?
I believe it's a type of language that's spoken
Mhm.
near the Caribbean. It's related to French, I guess. It's very like it has a lot of French.
It could be related to French, English. You know, the source language could be different.
Yeah, it's not just the Caribbean. There are Creoles in other places too, around the world.
So anyway, when children acquire a language, for instance, let's say pidgin, when they acquire it as their first primary language, as their mother tongue, it is a Creole. A Creole is more complex than a pidgin. It is rule governed. It is more systematic. It is a full language in a way. I mean, the key term is when basically children develop or acquire a pidgin as their mother, that would be considered Creole. So in terms of basically what concepts would be covered to help you with this, I would also, if we don't have a study guide of some sort, I will identify some of the key terms because we have so many of those. For instance, it is important to know major figures in this field. For instance, it is important to know who Chomsky basically was, to be able to identify him from, for instance, Piaget. Do you know the difference between the two in terms of language? Or Skinner, for that matter? You know, one is a structuralist, and obviously Chomsky is a generativist. His name is associated with actually the birth of new linguistics. So it is important to know prominent figures that have been referred to. So for instance, you have Peter Drogel as one of the editors of Language Myth. He is one of the pioneers, not one of the pioneers, I would say, William Labov, whose videos you probably have seen and references have been made to him. He's a sociolinguist. So is Peter Drogel. So knowing what sociolinguistics, for instance, is all about, the relation between language and society, very broadly, basically speaking. There may be a question about the relation between language and culture. Are they, for instance, related to one another? Can you separate them? So it's really foundational problems that we have. In a sentence, you may have a word that has change in meaning, for instance. To what, for instance, would you attribute the change that has come about in the meaning of a word such as, for instance, barbarous. What was it in its origin, and how it has, for instance, changed. So those are the foundational ideas. The questions really come from the study guides, the debates, the general discussions that we have had. Any questions? You know, why basically certain languages are seen as being more elegant, more eloquent, more complex, to be able to identify stereotypes, to know the difference, again, between prescriptivism and descriptivism. These are the foundational, really, terms used in general linguistics that would be on the midterm. Nothing really technical, just to calm your fears down. Everyone is quiet. Does that mean you're happy or you're apprehensive?
Happy.
Okay, so you will probably be happier after you take the midterm. So again, to help you out, I will just give you some general framework. What would be the salient concepts that would be covered in the midterm? It would be redundant, but definitely some of you could take advantage of that. Any questions about the midterm?
No.
Okay, so we didn't have time to talk about the second essay, the second prompt. What I would like you to do meanwhile is to look at the prompt for the second essay and start thinking about your topic of choice. I want you to post the statement of purpose in Dropbox. Statement of purpose, basically telling me what the topic of your choice is, why you have picked that topic, and what method you're going to be using. So I will take about 10 points from the second essay, and that will be not a very significant one, but it will propel you and compel you to pick a topic, not only to pick a topic, but to know why you have picked this topic and what your approach or methodology is going to be. If you have a source or two, you could also include those as well. So when I create this statement of purpose in the Dropbox, I will put in the directions and the expected outcomes. Any questions?
Professor, when will the statement of purpose be due?
You could definitely do it after the midterm. I don't want you to worry about it now. We are not terribly behind. I think I'm generally happy with the first draft that you have done. I'm sure that the revision process would go smoothly. If you have time, I'm going to create this sometime today, but definitely you need to post your statement of purpose by or on Monday.
Okay, thank you. Oh, also, when will the essay 2 be due?
I have to go back to look at, I would say we are not giving it more than 2 weeks at this point, but I don't have a specific date in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have a question as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for the last essay on Dropbox, I saw that there were 2 slots for peer revisions. Do we have to
No, one would be, you know why you have two? Because we have 2 peer reviews. One for essay 1 and one for essay 2 or 3.
okay, I get it now. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I can end this meeting. Let me stop recording.